All right, everybody. Good evening. Well, what is there to say? The drama continues. If you haven't seen it, I would strongly stream to completion is the utmost priority. But after the stream is completed, make sure to head on over to C-SPAN and take a little gander at what transpired tonight on the floor of the House of Representatives, which ostensibly is thought to be a legislative body, right? That's what the House of Representatives does. It makes laws that then govern the populace. But tonight, there was something a little different. What happened tonight is that the House of Representatives was transformed. It underwent a rather notable evolution into something quite different. Tonight, the House of Representatives became a group therapy session. Some refer to these as struggle sessions. Whatever you want to call it, exactly. What happened is that our good friend AOC happened to decide that tonight would be a great night to convene a group of members of Congress to get together and share what she said were their lived experiences. She used that phrase in relation to the Capitol goofball mob intrusion on January 6th. Now, if you're wondering why are we still reliving these, quote, experiences constantly day after day as if it happened yesterday, why are we a month almost happened hours ago? Well, it's because there's a lot to milk out of it, evidently. There's a lot of leverage to be garnered from those experiences which derive from that event. And so that really should have been obvious to you, as it was to me anyway, immediately upon the onset of that event. You knew that self-interested actors across the political and media spectrum were going to use it for all that it was worth in advancing whatever pre-existing agenda they might have. Clearly, the pre-existing agenda prior to January 6th was to exert maximum punishment on Donald Trump, on Trump supporters, and to purge to the greatest extent possible those actors from the political system, given the distress that they clearly inflicted on particularly left liberal members of political and cultural elite circles. But anyway, here we are. We're still in the throes of the aftermath of this event, apparently. And AOC, after doing her widely discussed Instagram live stream on Monday night, which then dominated the news cycles for the subsequent several days, apparently I was involved in one of those news cycles because Twitter decided to make me one of the nation's top trending topics because I put out a somewhat offhanded tweet that deviated just a little bit from the standard media approach to AOC, which is just to parrot as a member, meaning the media regards AOC as a member of their kind of rarefied activist cohort. That's how they view their role in the media now, which is pretty much straight up activism. And that's not to say that activism and journalism are necessarily incongruous. They can work in tandem with one another. It's not, one doesn't preclude the other. But the mores in the journalism industry have definitely shifted such that it's now just overt in a way that it hadn't really been in the past. And AOC has a certain sensibility that is very much aligned with those people who populate media and cultural circles. So, therefore, when she makes a pretty incendiary political claim, such as hundreds of people were on the verge of being mass murdered, which she said after the Capitol riot, or when she says that Ted Cruz conspired to have her assassinated. What tends to happen is that those claims just then get amplified uncritically by members of the media because, understandably enough, they view AOC not as a politician with the country's most formidable social media presence, which she has, but as a peer, as a friend, or as somebody who is just needing their constant, not just adoration, but affirmative defense. And so that's how they tend to treat her, which, okay, fine. I mean, that's your posture. I don't think journalism is some kind of sanctified practice where you're not a journalist if you're not following a specific set of kind of demarcated practices, but it's worth at least. So what happened? Well, I was asked by the New York Post to write today a column, apparently the lead column for their newspaper tomorrow morning. So go and pick that up if you'd like. It's online now. So I've tweeted it and I put it in the description box of this video. But what I basically just laid out, it was a pretty short column. I mean, that's the standard, I guess, for the New York Post. But what I essentially just tried to clarify or tried to home in on is that AOC is a very skilled political rhetorician. She's fluent in the language. It's her native language, this language of kind of millennial-ish driven therapeutic moralism, and she imports that into the political domain such that it's now maybe among the dominant rhetorics in at least Democratic legislative circles, which is that you are trauma. If you are purporting to have trauma, if you said that you've been traumatized or you've experienced trauma, then that trauma you can connect. If the trauma occurs in the political realm, then that trauma can be connected to any traumas that you've earlier allegedly experienced in the private realm, such as the sexual assault that she says that she experienced. Those traumas are entangled and they're kind of compounding traumas that you need to respect. You need to believe. You can't question or dispute, because if you do so, you are then worsening her trauma. And that isn't just an affront to her. This is how she puts it. This is what she said in her thing. You say or do anything which counteracts her claims to trauma, you're harming everybody else who's ever experienced trauma. So she's claiming to speak on behalf of. Go watch her speech today. Go watch what she said on the floor of the House. She said that to question her in relation to this trauma, this ideologized trauma doctrine that she's putting forward, to question that in any way is to belittle and demean others outside the realm of politics, anybody in the country who's undergone trauma in whatever form, whether it's through a sexual assault, through a murder, through a car accident, through any kind of trauma, even just a trauma of being, I don't know. I mean, there's trauma seems to be like an infinitely malleable concept, right? So you could be traumatized if you are, I don't know, lonely, anything. I mean, anything can redound to trauma, apparently. And all that needs to be respected. And that's the kind of rhetoric that she's employing, and I actually give her credit. It's politically kind of brilliant. First of all, it's not the native tongue of most of the people she's going to be dealing with in Congress. So if she's talking so fluently in this, they're just going to assume that she has some kind of authority and defer to her, which they have. Nancy Pelosi gave her a full hour tonight to kind of orchestrate this group therapy session. She was the lead organizer of it. And so if it's the importation of something new and novel and attention grabbing into the political sphere, so I think it's politically shrewd. I also think she's probably mostly sincere when she does it. So I'm not doubting her sincerity necessarily, or at least I have no basis to doubt her motives. I think she probably does have motives that are pure or that are sincere, but that doesn't justify her. You could be sincere and be doing something insane. So sincerity doesn't necessarily rationalize or justify what it is that she's doing. But the sincerity, I have no reason to doubt. That actually makes it almost kind of, if you're troubled by it or skeptical of it, that makes it worse because it means that she's not cynical, which I generally don't think she is. I think she does really believe a lot of it. And so she had this group therapy session where you had guys like Dean Phillips, congressman from Minnesota, deliver a speech where he goes out of his way to apologize to not just AOC, but all members of color, which I think is term, meaning non-white, I guess, members of the House of Representatives, for during this riot intrusion, calling out to his Democratic colleagues to join him in trying to blend in with the Republicans so the rioters wouldn't target them. And then he realized that was a manifestation of his unexamined privilege to call for that. And so he apologized tearfully to AOC. You had Mark Takano, a representative from California, these are all Democrats, criticizing anybody who would gaslight. I mean, they're using this terminology now on the House floor. He criticized anybody who would try to gaslight AOC by questioning her experiences, or at least trying to critically evaluate them. Almost uncontrollably. She could barely get through a sentence. She was crying profusely, and she wasn't even in the Capitol. You had also Cori Bush, freshman representative from Missouri, saying that everybody's experiences must be validated. So think of what that means. That means that the onus is now on the citizen. It's now on us, you and I, the non-politician, to validate the experiences of elected officials. That's now our responsibility. And if we don't do that, we are inflicting trauma and harm upon them. You're kind of flipping around the general dynamic that citizen, constituent, and representative have historically shared, which is that you demand for them to do stuff. You exert criticism where necessary upon their statements and actions. But now you're not allowed to, because then you are compounding their trauma. Now just imagine for a moment, clearly this would never happen, although it would be hilarious. Imagine if Donald Trump has an impeachment trial coming up, right? And apparently he said today that he won't be testifying, although that would have been very entertaining, and I'm sure that the cable news networks are devastated that he's choosing not to do so. But let's say he did testify at this upcoming impeachment trial, and he put forward a defense that just plucked, word for word, verbatim, the terminology invoked by these members of Congress, namely AOC tonight. Let's say that Donald Trump, when he was delivering his speech at the Ellipse ahead of the Capitol riot, was just trying to get space for himself to share his lived experience with regard to voter fraud. And he was traumatized by the fact that states changed their election administration procedures. Could you invalidate that experience per this framework? Apparently not. But everybody knows that in the case of Trump, it would have been just preposterous and nobody would accept it. Well, that's because the framework itself is a little bit silly once you think about it, and once you try to detach yourself from the emotional resonances of it, which are invoked by their proponents in order to kind of compel you to switch off your critical faculties. But that's what Congress is now, and AOC has spearheaded this style of political behavior, and again, she's effective at it. She's had a real impact. She's successfully turned Congress into some kind of like bizarre public psychotherapy session where these members of Congress seemingly compete against one another for who can exhibit the most outlandish narcissistic personality disorder. So typically these kinds of psychological issues are worked out in private. And it's not to say that they should be stigmatized. If you're depressed, if you're traumatized, if you're having difficulty, there's no reason why that should be stigmatized. And we've largely, at least in most cultural and political precincts, in elite circles nowadays, we've eliminated that stigma, and that's a good thing. But it seems to have gone a little far, where everybody is almost affirmatively obligated to partake in these, and nobody thinks twice about it, apparently. So yeah, I have to just implore you to watch this. Another bizarre thing is that AOC refers to herself now as a survivor. A survivor, meaning that's the kind of the terminology that sexual assault survivors tend to use, but she's using it in reference to her having survived the Capitol riot. Now, recall, she wasn't even at the riot. She was in the House office buildings where there's no evidence any rioters ever breached. So she wasn't even there at the time of the major riotous activity. And yet she's declaring herself a survivor, not just herself. She's saying that anybody, any member of Congress, anybody at the Capitol complex, anybody who I guess was in a 10-mile radius, anybody who just thinks that they were traumatized by those events could now say that they're a survivor. And then that survivorship status endows her with elevated moral authority to make demands, political demands for political actions and policies, such as, for example, demanded corporate censorship, which we've gone over. She did, and did so successfully. She got Amazon, or rather, she got Apple and Google to capitulate quickly to her demands, and then Amazon followed suit shortly thereafter in banishing Parler from their app services and web hosting platforms. And Parler's gone now. I mean, they successfully destroyed Parler. I wasn't a fan of Parler necessarily, but I'm even less of a fan of just destroying stuff on the internet that you happen to not to like. And she's also demanded the expulsion of members of Congress, which is another extreme remedial. But she's been using this style of rhetoric to bolster her demands. Her survivorship, her claimed survivorship, means that you can't, if you doubt the need for whatever she's calling for, you can then be said to be doubting her survivorship, which is this kind of mystically elevated status. And again, a lot of, if calling yourself a survivor is helpful for you in a private therapeutic context where you're dealing with a mental health professional. I mean, nobody. I mean, I and nobody who's reasonable should harangue you for that. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening is all that mode of rhetoric is being imported into the political domain in order to preclude criticism, in order to stifle really dissent. And people should be aware of that. So it's strange times here. And I will now go through a couple of super chats. So let's see. Render unto Caesar says, props to you for not letting them bully and stand your ground. It's not some kind of boldly courageous thing. I'm just a guy on the internet who writes now and then and does some stuff. Like, I'm not scaling Mount Olympus, or I'm not, coming under fire on the beaches of Normandy or something. So, but nonetheless, I appreciate it. Although, the average person, if they're at the center of a firestorm, and I talked about this yesterday, but if you are targeted in a way for opprobrium on a massive scale online, feathers so much. So you really have to be used to it. And I said that I was going to, in this stream, join those members of Congress in sharing my lived experiences, but that was really just kind of a hook to get people to click the live stream, just to let you in on the secret. I'm not going to share any lived experiences. I don't even know what that means exactly. I don't know why you have to call it a lived experience. Like, if I went to the deli today and got myself a sandwich, is that a lived experience, or is that just something I did? And if I call it a lived experience, is that to demand that you imbue it with some kind of added significance? It's a whole tangle of nonsense, largely. Again, if it works for you at a therapeutic setting, in a private setting with your friends, family, doctor, whatever, okay, great. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that is being done as a public political spectacle. Let's see. Johnny Wesley says she also mischaracterized Nancy Mace's statement. Yeah, I mean, so there's a back and forth between Nancy Mace, who's a freshman Republican member of Congress, who was saying that she's in the same hallway as AOC. She's a couple doors down, and there were no rioters coming down the hallway. Now, on Twitter, I mean, they're having a Twitter back and forth, so it's a little unclear if Nancy Mace was the media mischaracterizing and politicizing what AOC said? Was AOC mischaracterizing and politicizing what occurred? It seemed like she was initially, meaning Nancy Mace, referring to the media doing the mischaracterization, but then later on she did an additional tweet where she's accusing AOC of politicizing. I mean, who knows? It's just, but the one thing I come back to is, shouldn't journalists be trying to adjudicate in a dispute between two members of Congress by insurrectionists rampaging through the hallway, as AOC seemed to at least imply in her video? She at least kind of structured the video so that the revelation that the person coming around looking for her was not a MAGA quote-unquote terrorist, but a Capitol police officer. I mean, she kind of pushed that off toward the end of the story in this climactic buildup, and then a lot of the media coverage of what she said spliced that part out and had to be retracted. And so, it's just a whole S show. A long story short says, did Brett Weinstein reach out to you? I requested. I don't believe so. I did speak to Eric Weinstein maybe a month ago, a little more, maybe like a month and a half ago, about doing his podcast. And we had a good conversation. I was willing to do it. But I haven't heard back from him since then. So, maybe that'll happen at some point. I'd be certainly open to doing it. So I don't know, but if you wouldn't hurt to reach out if you feel so moved. Amy, if that's the Amy, then thank you. It probably is because of the Australian. currency. So thank you. All right, everybody. So thank you for tuning in to my world-renowned live stream. Hopefully, the next one won't have anything to do per se with AOC. That would be my preference. But then again, she's going on TV tomorrow for a traumatizing experience. So it may well be the case that I'm obliged to return to this subject. All right, everybody, read the short column in the description box if you have the interest, and we'll do this again soon. All right, ta-ta. Oh, one more live stream. Sorry. Eric? Do you do one more? Sorry, super chat or from Eric. Do you do interviews on other YouTube channels? I do interviews. Within reason when people request them. People will interview me. Or I was on a couple podcasts this past week. Angie Speaks. I don't know if she posted that whole thing on YouTube, but we had a pretty interesting chat. So if you want to look up her channel, a couple of others, Twitch. I do, whatever. I don't have a specific philosophy as to what I will or won't do. All right. Take care. Stay safe. Stay cool. Stay out of congressional struggle sessions.